Hey everyone, my name is Mark Johnson. I'm with the Maintenance Division with TxDOT, and I am excited to present the changes to the 700 series specs in the 2024 spec book. Most of these specifications, as we get into these, you will see are relatively basic. A lot of things like mowing the grass, patching potholes, kind of maintenance 101. But we do use these very extensively. At any given time, I like to say we have about 2,500 active maintenance contracts statewide. And on an annual basis, our contracted maintenance budget is over $800 million. And at the time of this recording, that number continues to grow as our network grows in Texas of highways and right-of-ways that we do maintain. Okay, so I like to start this conversation just high level by showing our specs that we had in the 2014 spec book. If you are familiar with this, we had about 30 of these specs. You will find in the 2024 spec book, most of these are moving forward. In fact, only one spec, 789 for treatment of ASR affected concrete. We are removing that spec. What we try to do every year is look at analytics as far as how often these specs are being used. And we did find that that one had very little usage, no reason to move that forward and make the book unnecessarily long for a specification that really can be treated under a special spec. But all the other ones here you see in black, these will continue to move forward. On this slide here, we are also introducing 3 new specifications, which I will get to here in just a little bit. You can see what those are with permanent concrete traffic barrier repair, replacing elastomeric bearing pads, and lane closures. Kind of the same concept applies there. We did look at usage of those as previously special specifications. We found these were used quite a bit, had a lot of discussion about that internally and thought it made sense to go ahead and incorporate that in the 2024 spec book as standard specifications. The language that are in those specs is not really new. These are specs that have been used previously many, many times as special specs. And we think both the language and the bid codes that have been previously used are going to apply well. And so we incorporated those in the 2024 book. You also see a handful of specifications here with a green star next to them. Really, I'm not even going to discuss those. The language is so similar, if not entirely identical, it's really not worth discussing. The main concept or the main comments I would have about the 700 series specs moving forward is that the changes are very minor in the 2024 book. I think that that's a testament to the fact these specs are working well. Most of these are not terribly complicated. No need to rock the boat when not necessary. And so for the most part, you're going to see a lot of the language in the specifications that continues in the new book as it did in the previous book, as well as a lot of the bid codes that you are accustomed to under the 2014 book are going to continue to move forward in the 2024 book as well. So I do have a few slides that are discussing changes to some of the specifications. I'm not going to read through all this text, just kind of want to highlight a few things. If you're not familiar, under specification 700 for pothole repair, we not only include pothole repair itself, but also edge repair work. Statewide, we do a lot of that work internally, but we are using contractors for that work, oftentimes in more urbanized type areas. When it comes to the actual pothole repair, one of the comments that we had, if you have a pothole, how deep is it? And if the pothole is 24 inches deep versus 6 inches deep, the payment is obviously going to be different. The cost implication to a contractor is quite different. So what we have done in this case is we are going to specify a depth of repair within the bid code itself. And I believe if I remember correctly, the depths are within 6-inch increments. So you're going to see a bid code from 0 to 6 inch deep pothole, 6 to 12 inches, so on and so forth. We will try to put in quantities based on previous usage because we're obviously speccing things out for call out contracts when we can't necessarily predict what kind of potholes we're going to have. So you will likely see items for different depths within these contracts and will be paid accordingly based on the depth of the pothole repair. Fiber reinforced polymer patching material, item 721, wanted to highlight that for just a minute. What we've decided to do here is rather than paying for this as a solid mix, we're going to pay for the cement and the bulking aggregates separately. The cost of the cement material is certainly higher than the bulking aggregates. And so we thought it made sense to separate that out. And we have clarified that in the specification, and you will see specific bid codes in the contract anytime that item is used. It's not necessarily a heavily used item, but does come into play from time to time for various types of spall repairs. And then lastly, I think on this slide, one that you should be aware of it is related to item 734 for litter removal. And you can see here in the bullet, it says spot litter callouts must occur within 48 hours instead of 3 hours of notification. What we noticed here in the previous spec book, we only gave a contractor 3 hours to respond to a call out. Oftentimes in terms of litter removal, it is a situation where we need to remove potentially a homeless encampment or piled up debris on the side of the road, something that could be safety critical, but to respond within 3 hours probably is not realistic. And usually when litter's on the side of the road, it's not something that needs to be picked up within 3 hours. We had discussions about this, and we believe 2 days is a reasonable time frame for spot litter callouts. So on the slide again, just a few other items that I want to highlight. Not going to read through the text, and I'll start at the top here with item 735 for debris removal. A lot of emphasis these days on bridge repair, a lot of emphasis on protecting our bridges within a channel. We did decide to add driftwood removal as a separately measured and paid for item. We think that that is critical. We're doing quite a bit of that work under our bridges. Oftentimes under bridge preventive maintenance contracts, it is kind of a subset or a specific type of debris removal, but a very common one when it comes to our bridges. Also, graffiti removal, item 740, we decided to hash out that a little bit more in depth. And what we're really doing here within the specification is we are providing a chemical method. If you are called out to remove graffiti, there's a chemical method you can use to check to see, does that bridge abutment or whatever the item may be, retaining wall, does it have an anti-graffiti coating present, maybe even on a sign panel? And if it does, based on the chemical test, that will determine what the method is to remove the graffiti itself. The reality is it's much simpler to remove the graffiti anytime the anti-graffiti coating is present, usually just a soap and water type treatment. If that anti-graffiti coating is not present, the method to remove is much more involved. And then lastly, just kind of want to highlight some of our roadside safety devices, guard fence, cable barrier, vehicle attenuators. What we've really tried to do here is to simplify the number of bid items we have in these contracts. These items get complicated because of the various components that are in them. Are we replacing one component? Are we replacing the entire system? In order to kind of streamline that and make this easier both for our contractors and for our inspectors, we have tried to reduce the number of bid items to the extent possible. You can see here when it comes to cable barrier, we had a request to use bid items specifically related to the manufacturer. In other words, rather than just having a generic item for a cable barrier post, we're going to specify who the manufacturer is because the cost implications are different from one manufacturer to the next. On the vehicle attenuators, you can see here the note says, unless otherwise stated in the plans, we are requesting contractors to replace the attenuator with a MASH approved system. Of course, on all of our roadside safety devices, we are very much moving in that direction. With some of our devices now, we are fully MASH compliant in terms of our standards. And anytime a device gets hit that is not MASH compliant, we are looking to upgrade that to current MASH standards to make our roadsides as safe as possible to account for the larger fleet of vehicles that we typically see on our highways. All right, and then lastly here, as we get to our 780 series, these are typically more bridge repair type items. Again, the general comment, very minimal change to the specs, nothing to be terribly concerned about, in my opinion. You can see here some of the changes. The idea, generally speaking, amongst all the 700 series is that the changes are relatively minor. What you saw here in the last 3 slides are just kind of highlighting some of the things that have changed. But for the most part, things are carrying forward into the 2024 book, just as they were in the 2014 book, as most of these specs are really fairly standard, and the bid codes that come with them, for the most part, have worked well for us over the last 10 years. So let's talk about some of the new specs. Here you see we have a new spec for permanent concrete traffic barrier repair. We are going to be incorporating that in the 700 series. The question here comes into play: if you're repairing concrete barrier, how much damage is there. And you see the note, if the damage exceeds half of the barrier height, we are requesting a contractor to essentially cut out the remainder of the section, tie back the rebar, and do a complete replacement of that section of barrier. If it's less than half of the height of the barrier, then it will be a repair. Generally speaking, there we're talking about setting forms and pouring concrete, oftentimes not as much tying back in rebar and that sort of situation. We did see enough usage of this spec as a special spec that we thought it made sense to go ahead and incorporate this as a standard spec in the 2024 book. As we as an agency continue to put more emphasis on repairing and maintaining bridges, we decided what had previously been a 4000 series special specification for replacing elastomeric bridge bearing pads. We decided to go ahead and incorporate that in the new spec book as a standard maintenance item, item 787. You see here the repair method, fairly straightforward. You're going to jack the bridge. You would remove the bearing that is likely beginning to slip out, and then you would replace it, and you're going to be paid for each bearing pad separately. In other words, you're not being paid by the bridge. You're not being paid by the bent cap. You are going to be paid by each pad. And if as part of that repair that involves a concrete spall repair, that will be paid for separately. And then lastly, what I would say is probably one of our most heavily used maintenance specs. Surprised that this was not previously a standard spec, but it will be in the new book. Item 790 for lane closures. And typically what these are, some of our most heavily used contracts where we are leveraging the private sector contractors to support state crews that are doing work in the right of way, whether it's base repairs, patching potholes, things that are invasive within the pavement where we need a contractor to close lanes to supplement our staff. We have experimented with a few different flavors of the specification, and in working with our contractors, we believe we've come to a good arrangement with this. So there's really two ways we're going to handle this. We are either going to pay contractors for setting up and tearing down a work zone by the each, and then throughout the duration of the day, while the work zone is maintained, you're going to get paid by the hour for a maintenance item. Or alternatively, upon request or preference, we may decide to pay for everything essentially by the hour. That includes your setup, your tear down, and any maintenance to the work zone throughout the day. So we have different flavors of items within these. 1-lane closures on 2-lane roads, 1-lane freeway closures. There's typically about 20 different items in these contracts. I would say there are maybe 4 or 5 that are heaviest hitters that come into play, often a flagger setup like what you see in the picture here. We will be stating in our plans what the traffic control plans are that are allowed. And as part of that, when you do the lane closure or the work zone setup, you're not going to be paid separately for a flagger, for example, that is required as part of that traffic control plan, or a pilot vehicle, or any kind of aero boards. However, if you are specifically requested by that office to provide additional flaggers, pilot vehicles, or aero boards, there will be separate items in that contract, and you will be compensated separately beyond the initial item for the lane closure itself. And then lastly, kind of following in line with item 502, we will be paying contractors separately for any portable changeable message signs, any kind of law enforcement or truck mounted attenuators that are required as part of the traffic control setup. We realize the cost implications for those are significant, and so contractors will be compensated separately beyond this item here, item 790 for lane closures. And that's it, and covers all of our changes in the 700 series specs. Thanks.